The cowboy promised his dying friend he'd protect his orphan daughter. He didn't know her horse's brand, marked her as the lost heir to the cattle baron who wants her dead. Clay Morrison knelt beside the makeshift bed in the shabby hotel room, watching his oldest friend slip away with each labored breath. Frank's weathered face, once quick to smile and slower to anger, was now pale as winter wheat, his eyes sunken but still fierce with desperate purpose. "Clay," Frank whispered, his calloused hand gripping Clay's wrist with surprising strength. "You gotta promise me something." "Anything, Frank. You know that." Clay's voice was rough with emotion. He rarely showed. They'd ridden together for 20 years, through cattle drives that seemed to stretch from here to eternity, through bar fights and blizzards, through good times and lean ones. "My little girl, Lily," Frank's breathing hitched. "She's all I got left in this world, and I'm leaving her with nothing. No family, no money, just that horse of hers and whatever kindness strangers might show." Clay squeezed his friend's shoulder. "Where is she now?" "Staying with the preacher's wife, Mrs. Henderson. Sweet woman, but she can't keep her long. Lily needs someone who can protect her, teach her to survive out here." Frank's eyes locked onto Clay's. "Promise me you'll take care of her. Promise me you'll keep her safe." "I promise, Frank. On my word as your friend, I'll watch over her like she was my own blood." Frank's grip loosened slightly, and for the first time in days, his features relaxed. "She's got her mama's spirit, that one. Strong as leather and twice as stubborn. And that horse of hers, Eclipse, fine animal. Came from her mama's side, I think. Never could remember all the details about Martha's family." "Don't worry about any of that now," Clay said. "Just rest." Frank nodded weakly. "There's something else, Clay. Something I never told you about Martha's people. They weren't just regular folk. Her daddy was." But the words dissolved into a coughing fit that lasted nearly a minute. When it subsided, Frank was unconscious. He died 3 hours later, just as the sun was setting over the dusty town of Cedar Ridge. 2 days after the funeral, Clay found himself standing on the porch of the white-painted parsonage, hat in hand, wondering how exactly a man went about taking on the responsibility of an orphan child. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, had been expecting him. "She's been asking about you," Mrs. Henderson said as she led him through the tidy parlor. Frank told her all about his friend Clay, who could rope a steer blindfolded and shoot a rattlesnake at 50 yards. Frank always was one for tall tales. Clay replied, though his stomach was tight with nervousness. "She's out back with her horse. That's where she spends most of her time." Clay followed Mrs. Henderson through the kitchen and out the back door. In the small yard behind the house, he saw a girl of perhaps 10 years old brushing down a magnificent black stallion. The horse stood at least 16 hands high, with a coat that gleamed like polished obsidian in the afternoon sun. Even from a distance, Clay could see this wasn't just any ranch horse. This animal had bloodlines. The girl looked up at their approach. She had her father's dark hair, but softer features, and her mother's eyes, a striking pale blue that seemed almost silver in certain light. She wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that reminded Clay painfully of Frank. "You must be Lily," Clay said, approaching slowly. "I'm Clay Morrison. I was your daddy's friend." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Papa said you were the best man he ever knew. Said you once saved his life in a stampede." "Well, he saved mine more than once, too." Clay gestured toward the horse. "That's quite an animal you've got there." "His name is Eclipse," Lily said, running her hand along the horse's neck. "Mama gave him to me before she died. He's all I have left of her family." Clay stepped closer to get a better look at the stallion. The horse was indeed impressive, muscular without being bulky, with intelligent eyes and perfect conformation. As Lily moved around to Eclipse's other side, Clay noticed something that made him pause. On the horse's left flank was a brand he'd never seen before, an intricate design that looked like a crowned serpent coiled around a sword. "That's an unusual brand," Clay observed. "Mama said it was her family's mark," Lily replied. "Said it meant Eclipse came from a long line of great horses." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps we should discuss the arrangements?" Clay nodded, but his eyes lingered on that strange brand. Something about it nagged at him, though he couldn't put his finger on what. An hour later, after working out the details with Mrs. Henderson, Clay found himself responsible for a 10-year-old girl and her valuable horse. They would stay at the small ranch he'd been managing for an absentee owner. Nothing fancy, but it had a roof that didn't leak and enough pasture for Eclipse as they rode out of town together. Lily on Eclipse and Clay on his steady bay gelding. Russet, Clay couldn't shake the feeling that Frank had been trying to tell him something important in those final moments. Something about Martha's family, about the horse, about dangers he couldn't yet see. The first few weeks passed peacefully enough. Clay quickly learned that Frank hadn't exaggerated about his daughter's spirit. Lily was indeed stubborn, independent, and possessed of a sharp intelligence that sometimes surprised him. She could cook better than most grown women, mend clothes with tiny, precise stitches, and handle Eclipse with the skill of someone who'd been born in the saddle. But she was still a child who'd lost both parents, and Clay often caught her staring off into the distance with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "Tell me about your mama," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Lily was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "I don't remember much. She died when I was 6. But Papa said she came from back east somewhere, from a rich family that raised the finest horses in the territory. Do you remember her last name? Before she married your daddy?" Lily shook her head. "Papa never talked much about it. Said her family didn't approve of her marrying a simple cowboy, so she left it all behind for love." She smiled sadly. "That's why Eclipse is so special. He's the only thing I have from her world." Clay nodded, filing away this information. Rich Eastern family with fine horses and that unusual brand. It was starting to form a picture, though. He wasn't sure what it meant yet. The next morning brought trouble in the form of 3 riders approaching the ranch. Clay watched them from the kitchen window as Lily fed the chickens in the yard. The men wore expensive clothes and rode good horses, not the kind of outfit you'd expect to see at a small ranch unless they had business. "Lily," Clay called, "come inside for a minute." She looked up, saw the approaching riders, and immediately understood. Without a word, she gathered the scattered chickens and herded them into their coop, then joined Clay in the house. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Don't know yet, but stay inside until I find out." Clay stepped onto the porch as the 3 men reined in their horses. The leader was a man in his 50s with silver hair and cold gray eyes. He wore a tailored black suit and rode a magnificent chestnut mare, worth more than most men made in a year. "Afternoon?" Clay said, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "Name's Thorne," the leader said. "Baron Thorne. I own the Triple Crown Ranch north of here." Clay had heard of Thorne, one of the most powerful cattlemen in the territory, with holdings that stretched for hundreds of miles. What he couldn't figure out was what brought such a man to his small spread. "What can I do for you, Mr. Thorne?" "I'm looking for information about a horse. A black stallion with a very distinctive brand." Thorne's eyes swept the property. "Word is there might be such an animal on this ranch." Clay kept his expression neutral. "Lots of horses around here. You'd have to be more specific. The brand I'm looking for is rather unique. A crowned serpent around a sword." Thorne's voice was pleasant enough, but there was steel underneath. Ring any bells? Every instinct Clay had developed in 47. Years of living told him to lie. Can't say it does. Why? You missing a horse? Thorne smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not exactly. More like I'm interested in reuniting certain property with its rightful owner. Well, I can't help you. There, Clay said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do. Of course. Thorne turned his horse around, then paused. Oh, Morrison, that is your name, isn't it? If you should happen to come across such a horse, I'd be very grateful for the information. Grateful enough to make it worth your while. After the three men rode away, Clay remained on the porch for a long time thinking. When he finally went inside, he found Lily sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale. They were asking about Eclipse, weren't they? She said. Clay nodded. How much do you know about that brand, Lily? Nothing. Mama never explained it, and Papa said he didn't know much about her family's business. She looked up at him with those pale blue eyes, but they scared me, especially that man Thorne. Yeah, Clay said grimly. They scared me too. That night, Clay couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Thorne's visit, about the specific brand he'd described, about the hungry look in the man's eyes when he'd mentioned rightful ownership. Something was very wrong, and Clay had the sinking feeling that he and Lily were sitting right in the middle of it. The next morning, he decided to ride into Cedar Ridge and do some asking around. He left Lily with strict instructions not to let anyone onto the property and to keep Eclipse in. The barn at the saloon, Clay nursed the beer and listened to the local gossip. It didn't take long before Baron Thorne's name came up. Richest man in 3 territories, said old Pete, the town drunk who somehow knew everyone's business. Built his empire from nothing, they say. Course, there's some that remember when he was just another drifter with big ambitions. How'd he get so successful? Clay asked casually. Smart man, ruthless too. Back in the early days, there was another big rancher family, the Blackwoods. Had a spread that rivaled anything Thorne. Dreamed of beautiful horses, prize-winning cattle, connections back east. Clay's attention sharpened. What happened to them? Mysterious fire took out their main house about 12 years ago. Killed most of the family. James Blackwood, his wife, their son. Only one who survived was their daughter, but she'd already run off years before to marry some cowboy her daddy didn't approve of. Run off where? Old Pete shrugged. Nobody knows. Just disappeared one day. James Blackwood never spoke of her again, disowned her completely. When the fire happened and the rest of the family died, Thorne stepped in to buy up all the Blackwood holdings. Said it was a shame to see such fine land go to waste. Clay felt his blood run cold. This daughter who ran away, you remember her name? Martha, I think. Martha Blackwood. Pretty little thing with pale blue eyes, from what I heard. Clay's hand tightened on his beer mug. Martha, Lily's mother. Which meant ... double quotes, the Blackwood brand, Clay said carefully. You remember what it looked like? Course I do. Distinctive thing. A crowned serpent coiled around a sword. Blackwood horses were famous throughout the territory for that brand. Clay finished his beer in one gulp and left the saloon, his mind racing. If Lily was Martha Blackwood's daughter, that made her the last surviving member of the Blackwood family, the rightful heir to all those holdings that Thorne had bought up after the convenient fire. And if Thorne had been responsible for that fire. Clay rode hard back to the ranch, urgency driving him faster than he'd pushed Russet in years. As he crested the hill overlooking his property, he saw smoke rising from the direction of the barn. His heart hammering, Clay spurred Russet into a gallop. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't the barn on fire. It was the house. And standing in front of it, holding Lily by the arm while Eclipse pranced nervously nearby, was Baron Thorne. Clay reined in russet 50 yards from the burning house, his hand already on his Colt .45. Thorne had 2 men with him this time, both armed and alert. Lily looked unharmed but terrified, and Eclipse was saddled as if someone had been preparing to take him. "Afternoon again, Morrison," Thorne called out pleasantly. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been having a fascinating conversation with young Miss Blackwood here." "Let her go, Thorne." "Oh, I don't think so. You see, this child is very valuable to me. Or rather, her death is very valuable to me." Thorne's mask of civility finally slipped. Martha Blackwood thought she was so clever, running away and changing her name. But she never thought to change her horse's brand, did she? "The fire at the Blackwood Ranch," Clay said. "That was you." "Regrettable necessity. James Blackwood was getting suspicious about some of my business practices. Had to be stopped before he could cause trouble." Thorne shrugged. "I made sure it looked like an accident. Tragic loss of a fine family. Except Martha wasn't there." "No, she wasn't. For 12 years, I've wondered if she might surface someday, might try to reclaim what she thought was rightfully hers. Then I heard rumors about a black stallion with the Blackwood brand, and I knew my patience had finally paid off." Lily struggled against Thorne's grip. "Let me go. You killed my grandparents." "Your grandparents, your uncle, and everyone else, who stood between me and what I'd earned through my own hard work," Thorne said coldly. "And now I'm going to finish what that fire started." Clay's mind raced, calculating distances and angles. Thorne's men had rifles, and they were using Lily as a shield. A direct confrontation would get her killed. "What do you want, Thorne?" "Simple. The girl dies, and all legal claim to the Blackwood holdings dies with her. Eclipse here will have an unfortunate accident as well. Can't have that brand wandering around raising questions. And if I cooperate, then you live. Hell, I might even give you a job. I can always use a man with your reputation." Clay appeared to consider this, letting his gun hand relax slightly. Thorne smiled, thinking he'd won. That was his mistake, in one fluid motion, Clay drew his Colt and fired, not at Thorne or his men, but at the burning beam supporting what was left of the house's front porch. The beam cracked and fell, sending up a shower of sparks and forcing Thorne's men to leap backward. In the confusion, Lily broke free and ran toward Eclipse. Clay fired twice more, forcing Thorne's men to dive for cover, then spurred Russet forward. "Lily, mount up." The girl swung into Eclipse's saddle with practiced ease and wheeled the stallion around. Clay reached her side just as Thorne's men recovered enough to start shooting. "Ride!" Clay shouted. "North toward the canyon." They galloped, away from the burning ranch with bullets whistling around them. Behind them, Clay could hear Thorne shouting orders to his men. The chase was on. For the next 3 days, Clay and Lily stayed ahead of Thorne's men by using every trick Clay had learned in 2 decades of cowboy life. They rode through streams to hide their tracks, doubled back on their own trail, and used the rough terrain of the hill country to their advantage. But they couldn't run forever. Thorne had resources, fresh horses, supplies, and men who knew the country as well as Clay did. Sooner or later, they'd be caught. On the 4th night, camped in a hidden canyon with no fire to give away their position, Lily finally broke down. "This is all my fault," she sobbed. "If I'd never been born, none of this would have happened. Papa would still be alive, and you wouldn't be in danger." "Don't you dare blame yourself for any of this," Clay said firmly. "Your daddy died of a fever, and Thorne's been a murdering snake for years. None of that has anything to do with you. But if I died, it would be over. Thorne would leave you alone. Listen to me, Lily Blackwood. Clay turned her to face him. Your daddy made me promise to protect you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Not because I have to, but because you deserve to live and grow up and have the life your parents wanted for you. Lily wiped her eyes with her sleeve. What are we going to do? We're going to fight back. Clay had been thinking about this for hours. Running isn't working. Thorne's got too many men and too many resources. But he's got one weakness. What's that? He can't afford to let anyone else know what he's really done. If word got out that he murdered the Blackwood family and stole their land, he'd lose everything. His empire is built on a lie, and lies are fragile things. So how do we use that against him? Clay smiled grimly. We're going to ride to the territorial capital. There's a federal marshal there named James Crawford. Good man, honest as they come. If we can get to him and tell our story, produce Eclipse as proof of your identity, Thorne's finished. But that's 200 miles from here, and Thorne's men are between us and there. Then we'll have to go around them, through the Badlands. Lily's eyes widened. The Badlands were a harsh stretch of desert and broken rock that most people avoided. Water was scarce, the terrain was treacherous, and it was easy to get lost and die of thirst. Can we make it? With Eclipse and Russet? Yeah, I think we can. Those horses of Thorne's are good, but they're not desert horses. If we can get into the Badlands, we might just lose them long enough to circle around to the capital. It was a desperate plan, but it was better than waiting to be caught. They entered the Badlands at dawn, following a barely visible trail that Clay remembered from his younger days. The landscape was alien. Red rock formations twisted into impossible shapes, deep canyons that seemed to lead nowhere, and a silence so complete it felt oppressive. Eclipse handled the rough terrain better than Clay had dared hope. The stallions, Blackwood breeding, showed in his sure-footedness and endurance. Russet, older but experienced, kept pace steadily. By midday, the temperature was over 100 degrees. They rationed their water carefully and sought shade during the worst heat, traveling in the early morning and late afternoon when it was cooler. On the second day in the Badlands, they saw dust clouds behind them. Thorne's men had followed them into the desert. How many do you think? Lily asked, shading her eyes to peer back at the distant riders. Hard to say, maybe 6 or 8. Clay studied the terrain ahead. There's a maze of canyons about 5 miles north. If we can reach it before they catch up, we might be able to lose them. They pushed their horses as hard as they dared, but the dust clouds kept getting closer. By late afternoon, Clay could make out individual riders. Thorne himself was leading them, mounted on a fresh horse and gaining ground. The canyon maze was still 2 miles away when the first shots rang out. Clay and Lily were just barely within rifle range, but the bullets were getting closer. There! Lily pointed to a narrow gap between 2 towering rock formations. Can we get through there? Clay judged the distance. It would be tight, barely. Wide enough for a horse and rider, but it led in the right direction. Worth a try. Stay low and ride hard. They made it through the gap with inches to spare, just as more shots echoed behind them. The narrow passage opened into a circular canyon with several exits, perfect for losing pursuit. Which way? Lily asked. Clay was about to choose the eastern passage when Eclipse suddenly lifted his head and nickered softly. The stallion was looking toward the western exit, ears pricked forward. What is it, boy? Lily leaned forward to pat Eclipse's neck. That's when Clay heard it, the faint sound of running water. In the desert, water meant life. Trust your horse, Clay said. He's got better senses than we do. They followed Eclipse's lead through the western passage and found themselves in a hidden valley with a small spring bubbling up from the rocks. It was like finding paradise in hell. We can rest here, Clay said. Let the horses drink and recover. Thorne's men will have to split up to search all those canyons. By the time they regroup, we'll be gone." As Eclipse and Russet drank deeply. From the spring, Lily looked around the valley with wonder. How did Eclipse know this was here? "Good horses have instincts we've forgotten," Clay replied. "Your mama's people knew how to breed for more than just speed and looks. They bred for intelligence and survival. They rested for 2 hours, then continued north through the maze of canyons. By nightfall, they'd put several miles between themselves and their pursuers. On the 5th day of their journey, they emerged from the Badlands into rolling grassland. The territorial capital was still 100 miles away, but the worst of the terrain was behind them. Clay was beginning to think they might actually make it when they topped a rise and saw a small ranch in the valley below. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and horses grazed in a nearby pasture. It looked peaceful and welcoming, not too welcoming. "Something's not right," Clay muttered, studying the scene through narrowed eyes. "What do you mean?" Lily asked. "Look at those horses in the pasture. See that chestnut mare? I've seen her before. She belongs to one of Thorne's men." As if to confirm his suspicions, 3 armed men stepped out from behind the ranch house. One of them raised a rifle and fired a shot into the air, a signal. "It's a trap," Clay said grimly. Thorne must have sent men ahead to every ranch in town between here and the capital. They wheeled their horses around and rode hard back the way they'd come, but it was too late. More riders appeared on the ridge behind them. Thorne's main group, cutting off their retreat. There. Lily pointed to a line of trees that marked a creek running east-west across the valley. "We can follow the water." It was their only chance. They rode down into the creek bed, the horses splashing through knee-deep water while bullets whined overhead. The creek meandered back and forth, giving them some cover from the rifles above, but the creek was leading them away from the capital, toward wild country where Thorne could corner them without witnesses. "Clay," Lily called out over the sound of gunfire. "There's someone ahead." An old man on a gray horse had appeared from a side canyon. He was wearing a badge, a deputy sheriff. "From the look of it, this way," the old man shouted. "I know a place." Clay hesitated. It could be another trap. But bullets were kicking up water all around them, and they were running out of options. "Follow him," Clay decided. The deputy led them up a narrow canyon that opened into a natural fortress, a circular clearing surrounded by high rock walls with only one way in or out. It should have been a dead end, but the old man dismounted and began moving rocks away from what looked like a solid wall. "Secret passage," he explained. "Used it during the Apache Wars. Comes out 3 miles north of here." As Thorne's men reached the canyon entrance, Clay, Lily, and their unexpected ally disappeared through the hidden opening. The secret passage brought them out in a grove of cottonwoods beside a larger creek. The deputy sheriff, who introduced himself as Tom Whitman, led them to a small cabin hidden among the trees. "I've been tracking Thorne for months," Whitman explained as they tended to their horses. "Federal Marshal Crawford sent me to investigate rumors about the Blackwood fire. We suspected it wasn't an accident, but we never had proof." "You'll have proof now," Clay said. "This is Lily Blackwood, Martha's daughter, and that stallion carries the family brand." Whitman studied Eclipse with interest. "I remember that brand. James Blackwood was a good man. Thorne's been living on stolen land for 12 years. "Can you get us to the marshal?" Lily asked. "I can do better than that." Whitman smiled. Crawford's been expecting something like this. He's already on his way here with a federal warrant for Thorne's arrest. Should arrive tomorrow. That night, for the first time in over a week, they were able to have a fire and a hot meal. Lily sat close to Eclipse, who seemed to sense that safety was near. Tell me more about my family, she asked Whitman. About the Blackwoods. Your grandfather James was one of the finest men I ever knew, the deputy replied. Built his ranch with his own hands, treated his workers fairly, bred the best horses in the territory. Your grandmother Sarah was a lady in the truest sense, educated, kind, always helping those in need. What about my uncle? David was a good man too, though not as strong as his father. Some folks thought he was too gentle for ranch life. Your mother Martha was the spirited one. She could ride and rope as well as any cowboy, but she had your grandmother's grace and intelligence. Lily absorbed this information hungrily. Why didn't grandfather approve of Papa? It wasn't that Frank was a bad man, Whitman explained. James just wanted more from Martha. She was educated back east, could have married into society, lived a life of comfort and privilege. When she chose to run away with a cowboy, James felt like she was throwing away everything he'd worked to give her. But she was happy, Clay said. Frank told me she never regretted her choice. I'm sure she didn't. Martha was always one to follow her heart. As they talked, Lily began to understand the weight of her heritage. The Blackwood name meant something in this territory. It represented integrity, quality, and tradition. Thorne hadn't just stolen land and money. He'd tried to destroy a legacy. Marshal Crawford arrived the next morning with 6 federal deputies and enough evidence to hang Baron Thorne twice over. He was a tall, weathered man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Miss Blackwood, he said formally, tipping his hat to Lily. I'm sorry for your losses, but I'm glad you're alive. Your testimony is going to help us put a dangerous man behind bars. What about the land? Clay asked. The Blackwood holdings? Legally, they belong to Miss Blackwood now. Thorne's bills of sale were based on false pretenses. You can't legally purchase property from people you've murdered. Crawford's expression was grim. Course, first we have to arrest the son of a bitch. They didn't have to wait long. By noon, dust clouds announced the arrival of Thorne and his men. The Baron had brought his entire crew, nearly 20 armed riders, confident that they could handle whatever opposition they might face. Crawford positioned his deputies in the rocks around the hidden canyon entrance, then rode out with Clay and Lily to meet Thorne in the open valley beyond. Thorne reined in his horse 50 yards away, his face twisted with rage when he saw the federal badge on Crawford's chest. Marshal, Thorne said, fighting to control his voice. I'm here on private business. These people have stolen property that belongs to me. That's interesting, Crawford replied mildly, because according to my records, you're under federal arrest for murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Thorne's mask finally came off completely. You have no proof of anything. I have Miss Blackwood. I have her horse with the family brand, and I have enough witnesses and evidence to hang you and half your crew. Crawford's voice hardened. It's over, Thorne. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way. For a moment, it looked like Thorne might surrender. Then his hand dropped to his gun. The hard way it is, he snarled, drawing his Colt. The valley erupted in gunfire. Thorne's men, caught in the crossfire between Crawford's positioned deputies and the 3 riders in the center of the valley, fought desperately but were quickly overwhelmed. Clay put 3 bullets into the gunman charging toward Lily, while Crawford and Thorne faced each other in a classic Western showdown. Both men were fast, but Crawford was faster. Thorne crumpled to the ground, his stolen empire dying with him. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes. When the smoke cleared, Thorne was dead, along with 6 of his men. The rest surrendered. 3 months later, Clay stood on the porch of the restored Blackwood ranch house, watching Lily work eclipse in the training ring. The girl had taken to ranch life like she'd been born to it, which in a way she had been. The federal courts had moved quickly to restore the Blackwood holdings to their rightful owner. Lily was now, at age 10, one of the wealthiest landowners in the territory. But more importantly, she was happy. "Clay," she called out, "come watch this." He walked over to the ring where Lily was putting Eclipse through a series of complex movements. Lateral work, collected gaits, and flying lead changes that would have impressed the finest horse trainers back east. "Where did you learn that?" Clay asked, amazed. "I don't know," Lily replied, patting Eclipse's neck. "It just feels right. Like Eclipse is teaching me what he knows." Clay nodded. The Blackwood bloodline ran deep in both the girl and her horse. They were carrying on a tradition that Thorne had tried to destroy. Marshal Crawford had offered Clay a job as a federal deputy, but he'd turned it down. His place was here, helping Lily rebuild her family's legacy. The ranch was already showing signs of returning to its former glory. The best cowboys in the territory were lining up to work for the Blackwood brand again. "Clay," Lily said seriously as they walked back toward the house, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Papa's buried in Cedar Ridge, but that's not where he belongs. His family is here now. I want to move him to the family cemetery, next to Mama and Grandpa, and Grandma, and Uncle David." Clay felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I think that's a fine idea, Lily. Frank would like that. And Clay? I want his headstone to say Frank Blackwood, not Morrison. He earned the right to be part of this family." "Yes," Clay agreed. He did. As they reached the porch, Lily turned to look back at Eclipse, who was grazing peacefully in the pasture where the original Blackwood horses had once run. "Do you think Mama and Papa would be proud of what we've done?" she asked. Clay put his hand on her shoulder. "I think they'd be proud of what you've become, Lily. You've got your mama's strength and your daddy's heart. That's a powerful combination." She smiled up at him. "And I've got you to teach me everything else. For as long as you need me, Clay." Promised Dot as the sun set over the Blackwood ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clay reflected on the strange turns life could take. He'd made a promise to a dying friend to protect his daughter, never knowing that promise would lead to uncovering murder, fighting for justice, and ultimately helping to restore a family's honor. The brand on Eclipse's flank had indeed marked Lily for death, but it had also marked her for something else, a destiny she was only beginning to understand. The Blackwood name would live on, carried forward by a brave girl and her magnificent horse, protected by a cowboy who'd found something worth fighting for Dot in the distance. Eclipse lifted his head and nickered softly, as if he too understood that the long journey was finally over. They were home.